Hello, my name is Michael De Anda. I'm a professional lecturer at DePaul University. I'm interested in the ways that LGBTQ people use games as a way of expressing their lived experiences and modes of knowledge creation. The title of my presentation is Using Bingo to Structure Micro Rewards. I will begin by talking about bingo in context, and I'm going to cover a little bit about the gambling history of bingo as well as some cultural tropes that we associate with bingo. I'm then going to move on to think about bingo as a modifiable framework through three intertwined lenses: motivation, visualization, and achievements. And I've selected three different games in which to think about each of these applications. Ultimately, I'm going to talk about bingo as an accessible tool for structuring micro reward systems, and it's rather low barrier to create such a system. To begin, I'd like to talk about bingo in context. So I'd briefly like to start by addressing that bingo does have a history as a gambling game of being regulated, especially in bingo halls. What I want to point out specifically through bingo halls is that bingo does have a history of being regulated, like other forms of gambling. If we think about how gambling games are often regulated and coded as rather deviant, it's interesting that bingo has kind of surpassed this because of how it's contextualized in different spaces. For example, we're able to see things like church bingo and types of charity bingos across the nation. And we don't really see other types of gambling, analog or digital, used in these ways. Like when we do, they're still regulated or coded as deviant or as gambling game. And we certainly don't see there are children playing, as you see in this picture of a church bingo happening. So when we think about bingo, the context really matters for how bingo exists in the cultural imagination. I would argue that much of this is owed to how bingo is often associated with elderly women, so much so that we have the figure or the trope of the bingo lady. So through each of these, the context is really important to consider how bingo becomes legible in society, and also how bingo, even as a gambling game, is largely feminized and aged in a way that removes the delinquency associated with other forms of gambling in the cultural imagination. I'd like to move on to talk about bingo as a modifiable framework that speaks to the way that we design micro rewards and badges. The bingo card itself provides a structure that people interpret and modify. Some modifications operate to influence the behaviors of users and players, and this is particularly apparent in educational contexts. So one example of this happening is Tietze's use of bingo in her Introduction to Pharmacy skills class. Here, she stripped the bingo cards of the numbers and replaced them with different objectives for her course. Students would mark off these squares as they would accomplish the tasks, and then based off of the number of lines created horizontally, diagonally, or vertically, Tietze would award grade increases to students who completed these patterns. And so here we see that Tietze uses the familiar framework of bingo to motivate students to accomplish these tasks in her class. So this provided a supplementary tool for students to use to track their course progress and consider other tasks that they could use to boost their grades in her class. The second lens I'd like to use is visualization. And to talk about this, I want to address bingo patterns. A line in a horizontal, vertical, or diagonal direction is the most basic and common pattern. And these get elaborated on to kind of change up the style of bingo. Visualizations of progress in bingo also invite one to think about what the visual is and how it invites practices that train us to develop meaning. So in Tietze's study, we see that finishing a traditional bingo pattern means that the student gets a grade increase. Drag bingo, however, provides a space to think about how these patterns speak to culture. In this game, the patterns to win a round of bingo draw from subcultural competencies of gay and drag cultures. Here, drag queens translate frameworks of gender and sexuality through their bingo patterns and storytelling practices used to introduce these patterns to players. The image here is a diagram I created based off of one of the patterns that Safanda Booz, the drag queen shown in the previous slide, uses in her drag bingo sets. And she's one of many queens who uses this pattern. But Safanda has a particular way of introducing this pattern to her players. She calls it her big purple dick and introduces it to the audience by using a laminated sheet with the shaded spaces here colored in purple ink. When players win this round of bingo, before she checks their card, she asks players if they consent to her seeing their big purple dick, and following with a message to the rest of the audience that consent is necessary in this context as a way of framing consent in other sexual activities as a necessary practice. Importantly, Safanda, like several other drag queens I observed during my study of drag bingo, use their drag bingo sessions as safe spaces for players to negotiate and play with gender and sexuality. And for more information, you can check out my interview with Safanda published in Wider Screens. If we think about drag bingo and we apply this thinking of drag bingo patterns to other types of design, especially for micro rewards, the bingo patterns structure the goals for players, and we can create interesting or fun images that relate to the larger context that help us understand the values at play in this context. And then we can use narrative and storytelling to emphasize the training and meaning-making modes that surround these play spaces and the communities at play. The final lens I want to talk about is achievement. So when placed within games or within structured systems, we might think of bingo frameworks as types of metagames. And when we think about it this way, we can use bingo to reward players to explore or engage in ways of playing in ways they might otherwise neglect. Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Links exemplifies this use of tracking achievements through a bingo framework. Here they have one type of campaign called Tour Guide from the Underworld Bingo. A bingo card is laid out for the player with different tasks that they may accomplish. And for each task that they do, they're rewarded with a small prize. And then once they complete lines, they are rewarded with a larger prize. Here, for example, for completing a single square, I'm rewarded with 5 gems. When I complete a row, my reward is something like 10,000 coins, which I can use to buy specific cards in the game. And then when the sheet's complete, I'm awarded with 50 gems. So in the game, players pay 50 gems and they get a booster pack. So here, the game is incentivizing players to complete different tasks within the game that they might otherwise not engage in. So for example, I don't usually enjoy doing ranked duels, but for completing 3 ranked duels, I'm awarded 5 gems. And this also counts toward my ability to complete lines on this bingo card. So for that, I'll do the task that I normally wouldn't. From Duel Links, we might consider how we incentivize users and players to perform different tasks by offering rewards with different values. And importantly, we might draw from this model to think about educational scaffolding within games and within the classroom. For example, we might consider how one progresses through the tasks on a bingo card and relate these to the rewards delivered for each of these achievements. Together, these 3 cases demonstrate that micro-reward systems do not need to be complex. Bingo provides a modifiable framework that can be used as a tool for different purposes, meanings, and contexts. My cases emphasize bingo as a tool for making arguments about learning and culture. And because several people are already familiar with the game, it makes it more approachable. And so the simplicity of it lowers the barrier to actually design a micro reward system. Thank you for watching my presentation. For further readings and materials on bingo, check out the link to resources and materials in the description of this video.